The Arrancar, the battle-hungry savages of Hueco Mundo ruled by Aizen. Today I want to dive into their power system and other world-building details surrounding the Arrancar that are crucial for understanding these beings as characters. This is a follow-up to my last Bleach video, which was all about the Shinigami zanpakuto and how it functions as one of the most effective windows into those characters, so I advise you to check that out if you haven't already. With that out of the way, let's get straight into this. The Arrancar are hollows that have removed their masks and gained Shinigami-like powers. Heavy emphasis on Shinigami-like. They don't actually gain the powers of Shinigami, but they do strongly resemble them. To better understand what makes an Arrancar, you need look no further than what they were before. A hollow can be naturally born, but they are typically former dead humans whose chains of fate have undergone encroachment. This could be for several reasons. Perhaps the process was accelerated due to strong attachments to a place or person they left behind, or maybe they were just neglected by the Shinigami who are entrusted with sending the deceased to Soul Society before they can turn into hollows. Hollows are slaves of their own impulses. They exist to consume human souls, which they are wired to believe will fill the emptiness inside of them. The process of encroachment consists of the chain of fate corroding and eating away at the soul of a ghost, their spiritual center, causing their entire spiritual body to burst and rearrange itself into a hollow with a mask. This mask functions similarly to the spiritual centers of every other being. They are their souls in a way, which adds a layer of irony to the Arrancar. These beings are defined by the hole in their chests, which represents their lost hearts, and yet their hearts are more physicalized and on clearer display than they are for every other spiritual race. Shinigami's hearts or souls are not something anybody else can see. They are something only they can observe by traversing to their own inner worlds. Hollows' hearts are the most defining aspect of their appearance. They are what distinguish them from everybody else. They're masks that shield their naked id from the rest of the world. When the spiritual center bursts and a hollow is formed, the being becomes completely defined by their id. They lose all reason and become masses of raging instinct who lack an ego or a superego as per Freudian psychoanalysis. Instead, their egos are locked away in the form of their masks, powerless to do anything but shield their id, almost like they're naturally shameful creatures. This is especially important in the context of Arrancar, whose masks break. Arrancar are said to regain their humanity specifically because they regain a conscience. They are no longer purely defined by the instinct of a hollow with no reason or rational thought. Essentially, their egos are no longer separate from their id, making them beings with the capability to actualize, like Ichigo, for whom embracing his instinct was a necessary step on his own path. Menos classification is crucial to consider as well. There are two main types of hollows, the regular type we see all throughout the manga and the Menos type, which are essentially an amalgamation of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of regular type hollows. Within the Menos type there are three subcategories and an evolutionary process. Gillians are the weakest and first category, and while it's believed in the world of Bleach that they are created when hundreds of hollows come together, Kubo used narration for one of the only instances in the entire manga to give us some further insight into the process. Gillians are actually the product of specific, more ravenous hollows that aren't satisfied by human souls and crave their own kind. They are drawn together by a mutual desire to consume each other, and they all meld together, forsaking their individuality and making a Gillian. A massive beast with the spiritual energy of countless hollows. But in very rare cases, one hollow can become king of that Gillian. It can transcend all the others contained in this vortex of souls and dominate the entire creature. This is the first step of Menos evolution, and if this Gillian goes on to consume other Gillians, it can evolve into an Ajutus, hollows that are far smaller and more humanoid in appearance to not only complement their far greater power, but their greater intelligence as well. And provided this cycle of consumption continues, the third, final and strongest category of the Menos are the Vast Old Lord, who are the smallest in size and most resemble humans. Menos evolution demands the constant consumption of other hollows. To become more human, you must eat more hollows, and the worst thing about this is that this consumption must be constant. They must continue to consume other hollows lest they regress into a lesser stage, which would make further evolution impossible and discard their individuality. Once a Vast Blasto Lord has regressed to an Ajucius or an Ajucius has regressed into a Gillian, it can never return to those higher stages of evolution. That is the curse of the Hollow. That is the cycle of endless combat and suffering they are trapped within. When it comes to the overarching soul classifications and how each must be the opposite of another, like how humans are the opposite of Hollows and Shinigami are the opposite of Quincy, the Arrancar are the direct opposite of the Visors. The former are Hollows that remove their masks to gain Shinigami-like powers, while the latter are Shinigami that gain a mask and Hollow-like powers through the process of holification. Aizen is tied to both of these. He is responsible for the holification of every Visored we meet in the story, including Ichigo and Tosen, and he leads the Arrancar as their god. From the perspective of the Arrancar's king, they are superior to the Visors. He refers to the latter as failures as Arrancar, even after he witnesses his top 3 be defeated by the Gotei 13. And I believe this is because the process of a Shinigami becoming a Visored is entirely artificial, while Arrancar are a naturally occurring existence, although Aizen of course accelerated and elevated the process through the use of the Hogyoku. While I won't be diving into Aizen's relation to the Arrancar in this video, he is very important to the overall makeup of the Arrancar as we know them in the timeline of the manga. The regime he commands strongly resembles the Shinigami he betrayed, with stuff like the Secret Zero Espada mirroring the Secret Zero division of the Gotei 13. As I've discussed in videos before, Bleach's cosmos is heavily inspired by the Buddhist belief of samsara, or the 6 realms of life and death. Samsara is a cycle characterized by constant suffering that can only be broken through transcendence. The Shinigami are the equivalent of devas who live in happiness for countless ages, yet they are still part of this cycle of suffering. Their power blinds them to the worlds of pain and fills them with an arrogance and superiority complex over the others in the 6 realms. And the Hollows are the equivalent of preta, or hungry ghosts, restless spirits who are driven by excessive cravings and attachments. They are extremely hungry with very small mouths and very large stomachs, an insatiable appetite they cannot fill, just like the never-ending consumption that Menos evolution thrives under. This standard of living is why the Arrancar are the way they are. Even though they have regained their humanity and function as rational beings who aren't literally chained to consuming others, they remain as such, as it is all they know. They are battle-hungry, sadistic, selfish, ruthless. Virtually every conventionally animalistic trait is attached to this species. In Hueco Mundo, the law of the jungle applies. Instinct trumps reason, and power dictates your standing within this society. And to complement this, each of the Arrancar have an animal theme in their powers, which starkly contrast the Shinigami, whose powers are more in line with the human ego. Breaking free from being defined by their base instincts and taking up a more rational approach to living is the path to enlightenment for the Arrancar, which we need look no further than Nell to see in action. The very last thing I want to quickly mention in this section is Arrancar anatomy. They have a similar physiology to Shinigami, as we learned when Uryu pierces Tsuruchi's Saketsu and she loses all traces of her hollow power, including her mask fragment. This also confirms that the mask fragment is inherently tied to the power of an Arrancar, which makes sense. As I said, this is their supposedly lost heart. Their mask is the equivalent of the center of a Shinigami's chest. Arrancar zanpakuto are unique in nature. They have their own specific abilities in accordance with their general characterization, aspects of death, and animal themes, so before we take a deeper look at some of them individually, let's quickly cover some of the base techniques that all Arrancar share. Pierrot is the iron skin of Arrancar. This is their main form of defense. In the case of the Shinigami, we don't actually have a name for their defensive utility, but we see Kenpachi demonstrate this against Ichigo with his overwhelming Reiryoku, making it so that his skin is as tough as iron. That's the same way Pierrot functions, with the user's Reiryoku condensing and creating an iron-hard armor that allows them to block blades with their skin. Some Arrancar also have high-speed regeneration, although ulquiorra specifically specializes in this, as most Hollows choose to abandon the ability in exchange for greater amounts of power. Pesquisa is the ability of an Arrancar to measure and locate Reiatsu, basically their form of sensory perception. The Shinigami use Reikaku, which Shunsui explains to us in his battle against Lily Barrow, although this is something accessible to every spiritual entity, including the Arrancar. Any spiritual being can use Reikaku as a sixth sense. Pesquisa is an evolved form of Reikaku which allows them to search for and measure Reiatsu at a much larger scale, which we see Grimmjow's Fraction demonstrate demonstrate in the second Arrancar invasion. In the manga, this is visually shown as little orbs of spiritual energy, which is something we see from Ichigo on 2 occasions. The first time is in Soul Society, where he originally thinks Chad is dead simply using Reikaku, but then once focusing and subconsciously using Pesquisa, which heightens his senses, he notices Chad is still alive. And the second time is in the first invasion from within Quilge's jail, as he's feeling the spiritual pressures of several Shinigami disappear one after the other. What makes me doubly sure that he was using Pesquisa here is the fact that he uses Sonido just a few pages later. Sonido is the Arrancar equivalent to a Shinigami's Shunpo, but there are some important differences between the two. Sonido is something all Arrancar possess. It's not an ability they have to train for like the Shinigami do. It's something they are born with to varying degrees of effect. And most importantly, Sonido differs from Shunpo by not exerting any Reiatsu during use, which is a funny contrast to the fact that it makes a very loud boom noise. Shunpo are meant to be stealthy, so they make a very subtle, quiet noise and can sometimes be completely silent, but they do exert Reiatsu, which makes them detectable. On the other hand, Sonido is very loud but doesn't exert any Reiatsu, which allows it to slip past both Reikaku and Pesquisa. We learned this because that's exactly how Ulquiorra determined that Full Hollow Ichigo was using Sonido and not Shunpo, by the fact that he slipped past his Pesquisa. And later in the first invasion, Mask comments on how Ichigo's spiritual pressure disappeared for a brief moment when he uses Sonido. Ichigo's usage of Sonido here is not only confirmed by the sound effect in the Thousand Year Blood War anime, but also in the onomatopoeia present in the manga. The Viz translations did not retain this detail, but in the Japanese rules you can see a consistency in the onomatopoeia used for Sonido, which is different to the one consistently used for Shunpo. These are techniques that all Arrancar share, but the next set of base Arrancar techniques, their offensive techniques, have several variations and different tiers. Ceros, Balas, the Grande Cero, Cero Oscuras, etc. These are all attacks of spiritual light. The tortured souls of Hueco Mundo, a realm that exists in eternal night and darkness, all use beams of light for their offensive means. These are also the Arrancar equivalent of Kido, although they're a lot more geared to the offensive side of things, with the exception of Negacion, which is an impenetrable field of light hollows can use to rescue one another. The Cero is the most frequently used. It's a powerful blast of concentrated spiritual energy, of which the power is obviously tied to how powerful the user themselves are. Now, while this is a standard ability that all Arrancar possess, there are unique variations that say things about the character using the Cero. Nell's Cero Doble allows her to eat a Cero, add her own to it, and fire it back at the enemy. For the former third Espada, who's defined by sacrifice, placing herself directly in harm's way like this is fitting for reasons I don't think I need to explain. Pesce and Dondo Chaka's Cero Syncretico is a fusion of both their individual Ceros. Stark has his Cero Metraleta, or submachine gun, and there are several other examples, like Tesla shooting a Cero from his eye. The Grande Cero is only available to Espada class Arrancar, and it involves mixing your blood with the Cero, as we see from Grimmjow nicking his finger on his blade before discharging the attack. It has a distortion effect on space and has the potential to destroy Las Noches itself, which is why its use is forbidden beneath the canopy. The only confirmed usages of the Grande Cero are Grimmjow in his fight against Ichigo, and Ichigo in his fight against Yuhaba, which he mixes with a Getsuga Tensho. There's a third case from Yami, which could be a Grande Cero since he's bleeding from the mouth before discharging this Cero, although it's missing the unique patterns which we saw from the other two, and it also doesn't seem to distort the space of Las Noches, so perhaps not. And then there's the Cero Oscuras, which can only be used by the Espada in their release state. It's essentially the counterpart to Ichigo's Black Getsuga Tensho, which he can only use when donning the Hollow Mask. Ulquiorra uses this to humiliate Ichigo in their fight, and Yami tries to use it against Ichigo before being humiliated in their brief fight. While these base Arrancar techniques do not give us as extensive of an insight into these characters as their unique abilities do, they help to characterize the species as a whole. The main focus in their combat system is heightened physical stats. They have more effective spiritual senses, they can regenerate, they have tough skin and shoot beams of light for their attacks. These are the beasts of Hueco Mundo. While they do share the same name as the main weapon of the Shinigami, Arrancar Zanpakuto are very different in how they function. Shinigami manifest their Zanpakuto spirit, their true power, by using an Asauchi as a medium. They have to spend a lot of time with the Asauchi and pour their soul into the katana for it to become their unique Zanpakuto. Arrancar, on the other hand, don't possess any Asauchi equivalent. They are born with their Zanpakuto. In Q&A number 535 on Club Outside, Kubo confirmed that when a holo becomes an Arrancar, the part of their mask that breaks off is what becomes their zanpakuto. As I explained earlier, the mask is the holo's heart, which makes this zanpakuto an extension of the Arrancar's heart, just like a Shinigami zanpakuto. In the spiritual sense, they're the same thing, but like I said, the way they function is very different. A funny side note about this is that Arrancar are considered to be holos who have gained the power of Shinigami, when the process of becoming an Arrancar is entirely natural, and Shinigami require an artificial process using the Asauchi to manifest their zanpakuto. It's more like Shinigami have gained the power of holos, which is why the idea that Nimaya based the concept of the Asauchi on the existence of Menos, both being the amalgamation of countless souls, is such a popular theory. Anyways, a Shinigami zanpakuto functions as an outlet for the spiritual power within them, a way to manifest the power from within onto the external world, while an Arrancar zanpakuto exists for the sake of locking up their spiritual power, and by releasing them they return to their natural forms. They're almost opposites in function. For Shinigami, the zanpakuto allows them to unleash the power locked within their soul, while the Arrancar zanpakuto is the lock itself. The nuclei of an Arrancar's holo powers is sealed within their zanpakuto, and by releasing its seal, they unleash their true holo powers, their true holo forms. The release of an Arrancar zanpakuto, the resurrection, is activated with a command phrase followed by the name of their zanpakuto. This essentially returns them to their essence, to what they were before taking up their humanoid Arrancar forms, and in the same way a bankai is a blend between a zanpakuto spirit and its user, the resurrection is a blend between the original holo forms and the humanoid Arrancar forms. Very similar to a bankai, but not exactly the same. There are some mechanics that might be a little confusing, but I'll try to explain them to the best of my ability. Arrancar cannot release their zanpakuto if it has been broken, while this is never the case for Shinigami, even if their bankai is broken. Of course, like I explained last video, a broken bankai cannot be repaired, but a Shinigami will simply release a broken bankai if that's the case. And if their shikai is broken, it will heal itself over time. On the other hand, a broken Arrancar zanpakuto makes it impossible for them to release. This is because their swords are literally the core of their power. It's not an Asauchi-like medium. In the case of Shinigami, zanpakuto spirits are not contained within the sword. They reside in the Shinigami's inner world, within their souls. Think of the term, the blade is me. In the case of an Arrancar, this is very literal. Their blades function like the Shinigami inner world. It is their soul in physical form. On top of this, releasing the Arrancar zanpakuto and entering the resurrection state completely heals any wounds that were inflicted on the body beforehand. However, the inverse is not true. Any wounds inflicted on the resurrection state are permanent, just like how damage on a bankai is permanent. And inversely, releasing a Shinigami zanpakuto does not come with any healing because, once again, their blades function as mediums between the soul and the outer world and not the soul itself. I hope I explained that well enough, but I probably didn't because that felt like a mouthful. Finally though, we can dive into the juicy stuff. How is the Arrancar power system used as a means of characterization for them individually? We're specifically going to focus on the espada because covering every single Arrancar would make this video stupidly long, and even then I'm not going to do a super extensive breakdown of the character writing that can be extrapolated from their powers. Just broad strokes to communicate some of the main principles, like the aspects of death, which Barragan states are the abilities, thoughts and reasons for the espada's existences. Let's take it from the top. Arrancar's aspect of death is greed. This is a very simple one since his zanpakuto Goteneria has the special power of receiving the abilities and reiatsu of all the holos he consumes. His animal theme is hard to pin down. His sealed zanpakuto looks like a tentacle or a mouth, but I've also seen people interpret his theme to be bacteria, which as something that reproduces by splitting into two would make sense given his design. It would also tie in nicely with greed and his zanpakuto ability. Zairoporo's aspect of death is madness. This one is rather difficult because it's impossible to pin down a main ability from his zanpakuto. He has the voodoo dolls, he can possess living things like he did to Mayuri's zanpakuto, and of course his ultimate technique is Gabriel, the ability to be reborn by impregnating himself in an enemy. Perhaps the wildest thing Kubo has ever put to page, and that could be the tide to madness. He is essentially cheating death and believes himself to be the perfect being, which as we know is the furthest thing from reality. To pursue perfection is a mad endeavor, as perfection doesn't exist. It may be a cliche, but it's the way things are. When it comes to Zayol's animal motif, it could either be a jellyfish or a butterfly, both being fitting for different reasons. Zomari's aspect of death is ecstasy or intoxication. This is a very simple one. Bruheria's special ability Amor gives him dominance over any object he gazes upon. He intoxicates the subject with an obsession over him. And the animal theme here, I think, is supposed to be a sea urchin. Grimmjow's aspect of death is destruction, and his resurrection heightens his destructive capabilities, giving him sharp and jagged teeth, claws and paws, a whip-like tail that can be used as a weapon, and just generally heightened offensive power. The animal theme is that of a jaguar, as confirmed by the cover page of 625. You might be thinking, hold on, isn't it a panther? His zanpakuto is literally called Panthera, but that's because all jaguars are technically panthers. All big cats, including tigers, lions, and leopards, are part of the panther genus. I may be reading into this too deeply, but I find this hilariously ironic since lions are widely considered to be the king of the jungle, and Grimmjow, who is a self-proclaimed king, his resurrection literally being named Panther King, is a jaguar, not a lion. Nnoitra's aspect of death is despair, and the main ability Santa Teresa seems to give him are the extra set of arms and weapons which he can instantaneously regrow whenever they're cut off. This power complements his desire to die in battle, the constantly regrowing limbs prolonging the battle, as he would despair if he died any other way. His animal theme is the praying mantis, which has ties to Nnoitra's character overall, but I can't really see a way that it specifically ties into his abilities. I have read that mantises can regenerate their limbs, but I'm not sure how true that is. Ulquiorra's aspect of death is nothingness, and interestingly, Murcielago doesn't seem to have any specific unique ability. Instead, it heightens all of his already existing powers. I think this is fitting in the context of nothingness. There isn't anything individual or unique about his powers. He simply has perfect mastery over the fundamentals. Even something like Lanzadora Lampago, which we've only seen him use, is just a Cero variant, like Stark's Cero Metraleta or Neo's Cero Doble. This also ties into how nothingness as an aspect of death is not that unique, all things considered. Nothingness is the crux of hollow existence as a whole. They are defined by the void in the place of their hearts, which makes Ulquiorra the ultimate hollow. His animal theme is that of a bat, animals that exist in complete darkness and use sonar or echolocation to guide them. Similarly, Ulquiorra's guide is Aizen's word and nothing else. Haribel's aspect of death is sacrifice, and maybe it's just her comparative lack of focus to the other Espada, but I can't really think of any way that sacrifice ties into her ability to create and manipulate water. Haribel's theme is that of a shark, and her hollow hole is placed where a womb would be located. Sharks are known to cannibalize their siblings in the womb, which could have a tie to sacrifice, or maybe explain how Haribel died as a human in the womb, but besides that, I'm honestly not too sure. The manipulation of water is a connection to Kain's zanpakuto, who is the mouthpiece for the main theme of the Arrancar saga, the heart, and Haribel's release does form a heart, but there isn't much more I can pass out from that, at least for now. Stark's aspect of death is solitude, and his main ability is soul separation. He split himself into two out of loneliness, forming Lilynet, who also functions as his zanpakuto. The coyote/wolf theme is very obvious. I mean, his name is literally Coyote Stark, and his resurrection is Los Lobos, or the wolves. This is a really cool piece of symbolism, as coyotes are infamous for traveling alone or in pairs, unlike wolves who are known to travel in packs. So in his base form, Stark is in a pair with Lilynet, as is expected of coyotes, but in Resurrection, Lilynet has returned to him and he's technically alone, which he compensates for by creating a pack of wolves. Yami's aspect of death is rage, and Kubo made this one incredibly simple. The angrier Yami is, the stronger he gets. In terms of an animal theme, this thing could be several things. A caterpillar, a dinosaur, a gorilla. Kubo was just having fun throwing together different things for this design because I am not capable of pinpointing a single main animal theme for Yami. Perhaps that's the point. He's the biggest outlier among the Espada as the only one who holds two numbers, number 10 in his base form and number 0 in his release form. For this last section of the video, I want to go over some scattered details I find interesting on the topic of Arrancar powers. I briefly mentioned how Nnoitra consciously buffs himself with the extra arms to prolong battle even though he claims he wants to die, and his opponent, Kenpachi, is a direct inversion of this, as someone who subconsciously nerfed his own power to prolong battle even though he clearly wants to live. There's a lot more to this dynamic, with Nnoitra reflecting Kenpachi's former self with the eye patch, the tough skin, and their responses to drawing blood. Nnoitra pisses himself when Kenpachi gets through his tough skin, while Kenpachi celebrates when Ichigo finally cuts him. The way Zairoporo makes dolls of his opponents that he can use to manipulate them both externally and remotely is inverted by the way Mayuri immobilizes his victims and treats them like dolls to control both internally and directly. Arrancar needs to devour hollows to acquire his powers. In the beginning he had no ability until he devoured a hollow and stole theirs, and Rukia defeats him by creating an ice sword out of nothing. With the reveal of her true Shikai, their contrasts become even more apparent. Gluttony, which defines Arrancar's existence, is the most perverse affirmation of life, whilst Rukia's power literally kills her body, embracing death as a means to continue fighting. The conclusion to the Arrancar fight is also called back to in the conclusion of the Tosen fight. Rukia's white sword stabs her dead superior, whose body is being used to betray everything he stands for, from the front. Hisagi's black blade stabs his living superior, who has betrayed everything he once stood for, from behind. On the topic of Arrancar, his existence is the perfect representation of the Gillians as a whole. He takes great pride in being the only espada of the weakest class of Menos. His ability is so effective it more than compensates, and everything about Arrancar echoes the fact that he's a Gillian. He is literally split into two, fitting for the class of Menos with the least grasp over their identity. His resurrection consists of unleashing every hollow he has ever devoured, essentially cutting open the belly of the beast, which all Gillians are. Nothing about his appearance is human, in stark contrast with the rest of the espada. His sealed zanpakuto manifests as a tentacle or a mouth to keep devouring more hollows with, and not the more classic weapons of every other espada. Kubo never goes out of his way to explicitly confirm which of the espada are Vasto Lord, Adjutus, or Gillians, besides Arrancar being the only Gillian. And while I do have my thoughts on what each of them are, numbers 1 to 4 are indisputably Vasto Lord. Remember, the more powerful the Menos, the more humanity and reason they regain. And their enlightenment within the hollow condition is represented in the fact that these 4 espada are the 4 who show zero interest in consuming more hollows, for varying reasons. Ulquiorra was literally incapable of eating hollows as he had no mouth. Haribel was a similar case with her mask overlapping her mouth. Baragan preferred ruling over hollows, and the Stark duo literally didn't want any more strength. They wished to be weaker and regress, which is the ultimate example of escaping the cycle of consumption. The fear of regression and loss of individuality that spurs the Menos to continue eating more hollows is what the Stark duo exist as a commentary of. Despite reaching the pinnacle of Menos evolution, they yearn for regression and have no individuality as a soul split in two with no idea of what they were like before the split. Stark and Ulquiorra were naturally born Arrancar who didn't require the help of the Hogyoku. We know this for the former since he was already an Arrancar when Aizen met him, unlike Baragan. And we literally see Ulquiorra become an Arrancar in the unmasked backstory. And the last thing I want to touch upon very quickly is the fact that Hollows and Arrancar naturally possess the ability to travel between realms through the Garganta. Hollows, specifically Gillians, use Kumon, which tears through the barriers between realms, creating a spatial distortion which opens a pathway for them to travel through. Arrancar have a more refined variant of the technique named Descorrer, or however the you say that. I think it's very fascinating that Hollows and Arrancar naturally have an ability that Shinigami have to create very specific devices for, like the Senkaimon. Shinigami are responsible for maintaining balance in the cosmos, and yet the ones who threaten that balance, the Hollows, are the ones born with free reign to travel throughout the cosmos. Couple that with other things like the fact that they are born with zanpakuto, or that their hearts take a physical and literal form for all to see, and things get really interesting. The Hollows and Arrancar are looked down upon and considered graceless, suffering souls by the Shinigami, but they are also naturally superior to them in several ways. They almost function as a prototype for the Shinigami, which makes sense with lore from the light novels detailing that Hollows predates the current world, and by extension, the Shinigami. Of course, there's the savagery and need to consume other souls that is baked into the Hollows' existence as part of their nature, and once they break free from this behavior by becoming Arrancar, they are greeted by an evolutionary cycle that demands they continue to consume more souls, this time with a conscience and not just an instinctual hunger. The world of Bleach is cosmically f***ed down to its very roots, but there is nowhere, besides potentially hell, that can compete with Hueco Mundo's f***ed upness. I think that's enough for today though. There's obviously so much more that can be said on this topic, but I need to stop writing or I'll never finish this video. This one is a bit more aimless than the last one where we spoke about the zanpakuto, and that's mainly because the Arrancar power system is a little more convoluted and far less explained to us in comparison to the Shinigami zanpakuto, but I hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless. The next and probably final installment of this series, diving into the shrifts of the Quincy, is a video I've wanted to make for a very long time, and I could see it being the best of the three by far. If you aren't already subscribed, go ahead and click that button because that video is gonna be good. Thank you for watching and have a good one.